Hey guys, my name's Sam and welcome to Prep Medic. This week's video, we are talking about realistic medical prepping for the apocalypse. So as you guys can see, I am driving home right now after a 24-hour shift. Super busy week. Just bought a house. My wife's still out in California, getting done with her fellowship out there. Going out to film this weekend with Seth, the Extra guys, and some other groups, which is kind of cool. So I just didn't have time to sit down in the studio, and I figured it would be a good time to test out this informal video format in my car driving home. So let me know how you like it. It's probably going to be a little bit more rambly than usual. Second, this video is sponsored by Medical Gear Outfitters. Medical Gear Outfitters is owned by Skinny Medic, which, contrary to common belief, he is not my mortal enemy, although he is paying me to say that right now. Medical Gear Outfitters is a supply company for basically anything you need medical. They've got a bunch of different pre-made IFAKs. You can put them together yourself. There's explanations on all the products there. Skinny Medic has a bunch of videos out about how to use this stuff. Just really good products, and they're owned by basically him, his family, and a couple employees. Good customer service, and you don't have to worry about getting, counterfeit products or anything like that. So I super appreciate him supporting the channel. On to the video itself. Let's talk about realistic medical prepping for the apocalypse. I see a lot of misconceptions online, and I really want to go through a lot of those today because I think we're wasting a lot of time and effort and kind of sitting on the peak of the Dunning-Kruger curve for a lot of that. None of this is to say you can't do something or absolutely shouldn't do something. I'm just a guy on the internet. I have a degree in emergency management and homeland security, which goes over a lot of disaster preparedness. I've been a paramedic for 10 years. I was in EMS before that. So I do have a lot of experience here. But again, it is a free country, thank goodness. And if you decide you want to do something or you think something works for you or your family, go ahead and do it. These are just my thoughts. These are my opinions. So the first thing I want to talk about is people being prepped for the apocalypse and not being prepped for the small stuff. You have a guy living in, the mountains of Colorado, and he has enough to start, his own herb garden and all of that, but he doesn't have the ability to escape a forest fire. He doesn't have escape routes planned. He doesn't have things cleared around his house. He doesn't have contact points with his family. And we all like prepping for the long-term stuff because it's fun. We like collecting the food that we'll probably never ever eat. We like, stockpiling guns, ammunition, and having these scenarios built up in our heads how we're going to be a post-apocalyptic warlord. The reality is we are far more likely to be faced with a local emergency that displaces us for a couple days, a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, than we are to experience a true grid is down apocalypse. So when you're prepping for the grid is down apocalypse, remember the short term, because if you can't survive the short term, you're not going to survive the long term. If you can't connect with your family right after a disaster, what good is all of these other plans you've laid? So make sure you have the short term dialed in, and that's the everyday disasters. In the Midwest, that would probably predominantly be either floods or tornadoes. You come out west, you've got forest fires, things like that. You go far enough, you get earthquakes, potential for tsunamis. Those major disasters are what you need to focus on first. Now, people have a lot of different feelings with the federal government. I do too. One good resource they have is Ready.gov, which is done by FEMA, and it's just a website that really goes over specific prepping items for different realistic disasters. I think it is a great resource that you can take a look at. The second point I want to impress on you is how absolutely catastrophic a grid is down scenario will be if we lose all medical infrastructure, overnight. I'm talking people dying from incredibly treatable diseases, things that we absolutely take for granted. You're type 1 diabetic, they are dead. My wife, who had her thyroid removed after cancer and just has to take, a pill a day of levothyroxine, she is dead. And really the only workaround there is going to be slaughtering an animal every week and eating their raw thyroid to get that hormone replacement up. People will die from crazy, crazy things. 100 years ago, 50 million people died of just the flu pandemic. The heart was considered an inoperable organ. If somebody had eclampsia or preeclampsia at birth, it was almost always fatal. 90% of children died from bacterial meningitis. And with the advent of things like antibiotics, new surgical procedures, the ability to create sterile fields and keep people clean, understanding germs and all of that, we've been able to take the average life expectancy of humans from 30 to in the 80s in almost 100 years. And that is amazing. But if we lose that medical infrastructure overnight, if we lose modern medicine, people will start dropping like flies. A splinter that becomes an infection could become an amputation, which in and of itself will have a really, really high fatality rate in those cases. So I want to impress on you that all of these imagined scenarios, it's not going to be pretty. So the reason I bring this up is I got in a bunch of arguments online about blood products in the apocalypse when I posted the video about blood patches not being a relevant thing to carry on your plate carrier. And a lot of people came back and they said, well, I have that on if shit hits the fan and somebody needs to give me a backwoods blood transfusion, they'll know what type I am. Blood is not a definitive treatment. When somebody says, I'm going to get a post-apocalyptic blood transfusion, that isn't really realistic. And I'll tell you why. So blood is a temporizing measure. Blood in and of itself does not fix patients in a trauma scenario. There are cherry-picked small scenarios where it does, but it's very, very rare. So if somebody gets injured, they have internal injuries, they're bleeding a lot, we will oftentimes give them blood in the pre-hospital environment to get them to a trauma surgeon or a vascular surgeon that can actually fix the problem. And we have to keep on giving that blood. The body is not repairing itself, it is bleeding too fast. And eventually our ability to give them blood runs out. We either run out of blood or we just can't keep up with their blood loss, their coagulopathy, and all of the derangements that come with that. So in an apocalypse scenario, okay, let's just pretend for a second you actually have the training to do a walking blood bank. You have a vamp bag, you have a needle, you know how to do that procedure. You do it, you infuse somebody that, fell off the roof and, has a liver lac or something like that. You're not fixing them. You now don't have a trauma surgeon to go to. You don't have a vascular surgeon. You don't have an ICU that can care for them for several days. You don't have rehab facilities to get them back on their feet. You don't have the ability to do follow-up appointments looking for infection, etc. And the outcome for that is going to be death in a vast majority of cases. Now, yes, we had ditch medicine back in the day. People got shot, had amputations, and did survive. But the mortality rate for these things was just astronomical, and that's what I want to impress on you. So you definitely should have short-term prep items. You definitely should have your tourniquets, your packing gauze. You should know your march algorithm, but also know that in an apocalypse scenario, the IFAK on your belt probably isn't going to save a life because you don't have the backup to really make that count. That stuff is just temporizing so you can get them to a physician. That's how we're built. That's how these IFAKs are built. So that's a lot of negatives. That's a lot of, hey, this won't work, that won't work, I don't think this is realistic. And to some people that'll feel like I am discouraging prepping in general. I absolutely do not want to discourage you from being prepared and thinking about far out scenarios. The reality with the apocalypse, though, is that none of us know. There are so many permutations on what the apocalypse looks like. It could be purely a financial collapse. It could be a nuclear war. It could be, in ground invasion. It could be disease. It could be famine. We don't know what that looks like. And you might gamble and say, well, I think it's a zombie apocalypse, and that's what you prep for, and maybe you're right, but chances are you're wrong. Which is why individual preps when it comes to medical items are largely, in my opinion, unnecessary. Or not so much unnecessary, but not going to be the biggest bang for your buck. The best thing you can do right now, now that we have good medical infrastructure, we have all of this stuff working for us, is go and get knowledge. And admittedly, there's not a lot of classes, if any, that I know of that are truly teaching evidence-based apocalypse medicine, grid is down medicine. That being said, the ability to improvise comes from a good understanding of the fundamentals we know now. A really good baseline is, your weekend class. If you can go to a TCCC class, that's Tactical Combat Casualty Care, that's a great place to start. It's not a great place to end in this situation, but you can get some fundamental knowledge. If you have the time and the capital to do it, go take an EMT class. You can knock those out in a month, 2 months in some cases, or you can extend it up to a semester or more. And that really sets you up for success because it teaches basic life support for a lot of different things, which coincidentally, basic life support is what you're going to use most of the time in an apocalypse scenario. You're going to be splinting things. That's something that would work very well in an apocalypse scenario. You can learn how to align bones. You're learning how to manage pain without pharmacological intervention. So I think EMT is a great place. Now, you can also go and take some of these backwood med classes. Knowles has a wilderness first responder course that's excellent. And then my buddy Timogen has a course up in Canada, I believe. I'm not sure where he's hosting it right now, though, where he teaches kind of that prolonged field care in resource-limited environments. And when you get that baseline, when you understand the why behind the what, you can start to extrapolate your experiences in medicine and start to make things work in an improvised environment. If you learn how to splint with a splint and you know how it should look, you can much more easily improvise one in the backwoods, take, a magazine or a tree branch or something and make that yourself. So knowledge is absolutely key. As far as supplies go, I can't guide you as far as like true apocalypse scenarios very well because like I said, there's a lot of permutations of that apocalypse and what supplies we'll actually have. I would focus on the short term first. So yeah, have your March algorithm things. Just know that that is temporizing, know its limitations, and then start growing that into like comfort items, things like splints, wound flushes. You can get an IV if you want to. Just make sure you're trained on how to do it. I don't think that's the biggest bang for your buck or the best use of your time, but you definitely can. You can get some like longer term antibiotics. I have a review of a case a while back I did where you can get prescription meds sent to you. Just know that, if this is more than a couple months of grid is down issues, those meds are going to start going bad. And yeah, meds last a lot longer after expiration. However, they don't last forever and they will degrade over time and they'll stop working. The last two things I want to leave you with: have a way to look things up. The internet will most assuredly go down in almost any kind of disaster situation. So start cultivating a library of knowledge, of written word. Like if you want to print out a recipe for making your own normal saline to be infused in an IV, that's great. But you don't have to memorize that and waste your time, trying to do that at home and, have that knowledge stored up in your head. I don't think that's the biggest bang for your buck. But there are scenarios where that could be a useful intervention in the apocalypse. So if you have reference material, that is absolutely huge. And that extends way beyond just medicine. That's going to be like, hey, how do I fashion an atlatl? How do I, make a shelter? How do I build a fire without any flint? Those things are going to be invaluable if you can just open a book and read it without connectivity to the internet. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is mindset in these scenarios. And it gets to what I was talking about at the beginning of the video, where a lot of people are going to die. And a lot of people are going to die from very, very preventable diseases or things that are preventable in this day and age. And you just have to have the mindset that there's going to be a lot that goes wrong and there's going to be a lot you can't control, and it's going to be absolutely awful. Go into this knowing it's going to be awful and start giving more weight to smaller scenarios. Right now, somebody breaks their arm, we don't think much of it. You break your arm, you have an open fracture in the wilderness, that is going to lead to a massive amount of infection and potentially amputation and potentially death. So just understand that small things will become big things, and you have to be ready to kind of face the realities of that world. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, I am just some guy on the internet. These are my opinions. You do what is right for you or what you believe is right for you. That is totally okay. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments down below, and I will see you next week.